Good morning, namaste, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday morning service. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityormamritam Gamaya Aviravir Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourself, and evermore protect us by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om Vishnurva Tripurantako Bhavatu Va Brahma Surendrotava Bhanurva Shashalakshanota Bhagavan Buddhota Siddhota Va Ragadvesha Visharti Moharahita Sattvanukampodyato Yasarvai Sahasamskrito Gunaganais Tasmai Namah Sarvada. The Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I worship always the one going by any name and belonging to any tradition, who is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, who is filled with compassion towards all living beings, and is possessed of all noble virtues. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning, the talk is one in the series on the basic concepts of Vedanta. And the concept we're taking this morning is the concept of the Jiva. The Jiva, the individual soul. This is an extremely important concept in Vedanta. In fact, without understanding the concept of the Jiva, one can't understand Vedanta. Whether one is a follower of the non-dualistic school of Vedanta or any other school, the dualistic, the qualified monistic, or the non-dualistic school, the concept of Jiva is fundamental. And yet it doesn't receive much attention as a concept. So what is the Jiva? The word Jiva comes, as all Sanskrit words, from a Sanskrit verbal root, Jiv, which means to live. And so the Jiva is one who lives. So a Jiva is any living being. Every living being, or another way of putting it, every living being is a Jiva. And that includes human beings, it includes animals, it includes plants, it includes bacteria. Wherever there is sentience and life, there is a Jiva. So the concept of Jiva is basic to understanding who we are. Now, in some traditions, for instance, in Christianity, there has been the question: do animals have souls? Do plants have souls? When my dog dies, does he go to heaven also? Or is there a dog heaven? Or is the dog without a soul and it just dies and it's gone? In Hinduism, that question doesn't arise because wherever there is life, there is a Jiva. So what we want to understand this morning is what exactly the Jiva is. We all know the concept of Brahman, that is, well, I should say we all know, that is, all of us who have studied a little bit of Vedanta know that there is Brahman, that is the infinite reality, the infinite spiritual reality, the impersonal reality. And we know the Atman, that there is the self, the spiritual self of each individual is known as the Atman. And in non-dualistic Vedanta, the Atman is said to be Brahman, that the Atman is one with the infinite. And so that is true of the self of each one of us, human beings. It's true of the dog, the cat, the bacterium, the plant, the tree, etc. Wherever there is life, the reality behind it is Brahman. But then even in a stone, the reality behind a stone is Brahman. So what is it that distinguishes a stone from a living being? Well, there's several things. So let's analyze what it is that is the living being. But first, let me mention that many, many years ago, one of my friends in the order, he was a young brahmachari at the time, he heard from one of our swamis. The swami was the one who related this to me. He heard from one of our swamis about the Jivatman, the individual self, and he said, "But I thought there was only one Atman." And so that's a common confusion in Vedanta, especially those of us who come from a non-dualistic tradition. We hear about the Atman, that there's one Atman that is one with Brahman, and we think that that is the self. But then, is that what I experience? Is that what I experience? Do I experience myself as one with the infinite? No, I don't. I experience myself as a limited being. I experience myself as having been born, of growing, of living life for a certain period. And then I foresee that a time will come when I die also, because I see it all around me. I see that there's no escaping death. Even though most of us live as if we were never going to die, the fact is that we all know that we will have to die someday, no matter how hard we try to avoid it. In San Diego, there was a weekly, it wasn't a glossy magazine, it was on a cheap paper, but it was a popular, was it The Reader or something like that? I forget the name of it. It may still be published. But I remember one issue came out where there was a grumpy old man sitting in he looked grumpy. Of course, from the picture, you couldn't be sure he was grumpy, but the picture taken of him showed a grumpy old man seated in a nursing home. And the caption on the front cover was, "We don't talk about that here." And of course, when you looked at the article, it obviously meant we don't talk about death here, even though it was an old age home, a senior facility. And so we try to avoid the fact, but we know that we were born, we live, and we're going to die. That doesn't happen to the Atman. The Atman isn't born, the Atman doesn't die, the Atman doesn't breathe. So there's something between our present experience and what Vedanta says is the ultimate truth. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand who we are as we experience ourselves now, how can we know where to seek for our infinite nature? Because I don't experience myself as that. I have to deal with how I experience my life right now, my existence right now. So a jiva, again, is distinguished by two main things. First of all, wherever there is a jiva, that is an individual, there is consciousness, sentience, there is awareness. Even a bacterium responds to some stimuli in its environment. A plant responds to stimuli. A plant can't get up and walk around, but a plant does respond to stimuli, and it even moves. It doesn't move its root system, perhaps, but the plant seeks out life. And so I remember at Trabuco, where in the front lawn, you couldn't call it a lawn, but the front jungle of Trabuco Monastery in California, so many trees had grown up. The trees that grew up after the big eucalyptus trees grew, then they would big pine trees and even other eucalyptus trees, they would grow horizontally, trying to find some place to find life and then grow up. So you had all of these trees growing like this and then up, seeking light. And so plants also respond to stimuli. So they are aware. Wherever there is a jiva, there is awareness. So you have consciousness, but you have something else which is different from consciousness. And it's important to distinguish these two things, which are not often distinguished in our minds and in our thinking. And that is life. What is called in Sanskrit prana. Most of you have heard the word prana, like in pranayama, control of the prana, which doesn't mean control of the breath. Prana doesn't mean breath. Breath is air that comes and leaves the body. There's nothing living about breath, but it's the life force which controls the breathing. It's because of the life force that the lungs expand and contract. The diaphragm expands and contracts, bringing air into the lungs and expelling air from the lungs. So prana doesn't mean breath. It means the life force which controls all vital activities. Right now, I had a light breakfast just a little bit ago. I ate a banana and a protein shake. And so I'm hopefully digesting that right now, but I'm not aware of that. Thank God. We wouldn't want to be aware of all of the processes going on within the body. But there's something which is taking care of that digestive process. I'm speaking. And as I've said on various occasions, I don't know how I do it. None of us know how we do it. Even if we study and become very learned in physiology and anatomy, and especially with the vocal system, we still don't really know how we do it. We can catalog all sorts of things that are going on, but how it happens, we don't know. But that is taken care of by prana. So prana is the life force which governs all of our vital functions. So when a person dies, the prana leaves the body, but along with the prana goes the consciousness which was tied to that particular body. So that's true of a plant, it's true of an animal, it's true of a bacterium. So for there to be a living being, there has to be consciousness, that is sentience, and there has to be life. So life and consciousness are two different things. I'm not conscious of the digestive process that is going on within me, but the digestive process is going on. That's being taken care of by prana. If there were no difference between prana and consciousness, then I would be fully conscious of every biological function that's going on within me and every mental function, because the prana governs mental functioning and physical functioning. And it's that which mediates between the mind and body. One of the mysteries in modern medicine is the relationship between the soma and the psyche. The body and the mind. But it's prana which mediates between the two. And it's prana which allows the body to affect the mind and the mind to affect the body, as we all know happens. So, of course, in modern science, one idea, and perhaps the dominant idea, it has been the dominant idea, is that the mind is nothing but a part of the body. The mind is nothing but the brain. And so the brain and body are all the same thing, or the brain is one part of the body, just as the liver is a part, the stomach is a part, your hand is a part, your foot is a part, so the brain is a part. And so there's nothing to explain about a human being but the physical body. But Vedanta says no. The mind itself may work through the brain, as indeed certainly it does. But it's not the brain. Just as electricity may work through an electrical system, but electricity is not the system that it works through. The system facilitates the functioning and the directing and the utilization of electrical energy, but it's not electrical energy itself. And so the mind uses the brain and nervous system, but it's not identical with them. Otherwise, if you understood the biology of the brain, you would understand thought. But that's not true. You can follow the pathways in the brain, the electrochemical processes going on, the transmission of signals across neurons and neuronal pathways, etc., in the brain and through the nervous system. But that's all that you have. From that, how do you jump from that to conscious experience? That's something that science cannot explain. Many scientists pretend to. They say that, well, it's this is what you get from this. No, that's stupidity. How do you go from a catalog of pathways and electrochemical impulses and cellular activity and molecular activity and all of that? How do you go from that to this? You can't explain it. No scientist can explain it because something else is going on. And so you have in a living being, you have a body and you have a mind, which, yes, is tied to the body and which works through the nervous system. Now, in a plant, you don't have a nervous system. In lower animals, you don't have a nervous system. In bacteria, you don't have a nervous system. In a protozoa, you don't have a nervous system. And yet you find life and sentience. So they have their own ways of experiencing, their own ways of, their own means of maintaining sentient awareness of their own body and their surroundings, but it's not a nervous system. And so you have, again, you have a body and a mind which works within it, but you also have something which is distinguished from both the mind and the body, which is life, the life force, prana. But then prana, again, as I showed, that is not conscious. Most of the time, I'm not conscious of my breathing. I can practice pranayama, and during that exercise, I'm aware of my breathing. I consciously control my breathing. But after the exercise is over, I hope and depend on the breathing going on automatically because I stop thinking about it. And if I stop thinking about it and it stops, then I'm in trouble. No, it continues automatically. So something is regulating the whole system, and that is the prana. But then, distinguished from prana again is sentience, which is consciousness. And so a jiva is made up of all of these things. A jiva is, first of all, found within a world system. Vedanta and many other religious traditions say that this is not the only world system, and I don't mean other planets and other galaxies, but this disappears and another world system appears, like the frequency on a radio. When the mind is attuned in a certain way, this world appears. And when the mind changes, this world disappears and another world appears. So to exist in any realm of existence, any world, one has to have a body appropriate for that world. And so if you go to, if you believe in, you don't have to believe in these things, but Vedanta says that there are other worlds that great souls have experienced. And people who had near-death experiences sometimes go far enough so that they experience something of that too. They don't go far or they wouldn't be able to come back, but they do go far enough to see that there is another realm besides this. And so where in whatever realm you find yourself in a body appropriate to that realm. So in this realm, the one that we know, the one that we call home, this world that we live in, we have a body appropriate to this world. It may work well, it may not work well, it may be healthy, may not be healthy. That doesn't matter. It's still appropriate to the world we live in. And then there's a mind which allows for the connection of sentience to the physical body, so that I feel that my body is sentient also. The sentience is not part of the body. It's an identification of consciousness with the body through the nervous system. So I have a body, I have a mind, and I have life force, that which, again, makes me living and not dead. When a person dies, then the prana leaves the body, but the consciousness also leaves the body. So in the Upanishads, it said that wherever the prana goes, there the other senses and the consciousness go with it. So at the time of death, the prana stops working through this body and the prana leaves the body. And along with it go the sense powers, the power to hear, see, smell, taste, as well as the mind and the consciousness. Because again, remember in Vedanta that consciousness is separate from the body, consciousness is separate from the mind, and consciousness is separate from the life force, prana. So you have a body, you have a mind with different aspects of the mind, you have prana, and you have consciousness. So that's what makes up a jiva. To be a jiva, you have to be embodied consciousness, individualized consciousness. So a jiva has a sense of being a kartaham, an agent of action. Kartaham means I am an agent. I am a doer. I do things. Even a bacterium has that sense of agency. And that's why the bacterium seeks its own, to preserve its own life and to enjoy itself in whatever limited way a bacterium enjoys itself. So it has a sense of being a doer. Every living being has a sense of being a doer, and it has the sense of being bhoktaham. I am the recipient of experience. I am the experiencer. I am the enjoyer. Bhokta means enjoyer, but it means enjoying good things and bad things. So it really means the experiencer. Since in English, enjoyer gives a sense of having a good time. But no, here the enjoyer means one who receives all types of experiences, good and bad, pleasurable and painful experiences. So a jiva has a body appropriate to the world in which it lives. It has a mind which is identified with this body. It has the life force which makes this body living and which joins the mind and the body. Then there is the individualized consciousness, which has the sense of I am a doer and I am an experiencer. So all living beings have that. One of the very strange things in modern Western thought, which most scientists have gotten beyond now, I hope, but it was present through much of the 20th century among many scientists, was the idea that animals don't experience pleasure or pain, that animals basically are just, because they don't have higher consciousness, they're basically just action-reaction machines. And so if you hurt an animal and it cries out, an animal that can make a sound like a dog or a cat, that's just a physical response. It doesn't mean that the animal is experiencing anything. That was extremely convenient because it meant that I can experiment on animals and cause them all kind of pain, but I'm not really hurting anything. So I can do it freely. Even if the animal cries out, it doesn't matter because it's just a machine. So that was a very convenient understanding, but I think most have gone beyond that. Anyone who's had a pet knows that animals have feelings, they have emotions, they have experience of pleasure and pain, fear, anger, etc. And so, again, a jiva is a composite. As you know, the Buddha, he denied the reality of the individual. And the Buddha also denied that there was any supreme unity to this universe. The Buddha said that there is no God and that there is no soul. Of course, it's true that once Buddha was asked, so the Buddha says that there is no God. And Buddha said, did the Buddha say that? And then the disciple said, well, then does the Buddha say that there is a God? And Buddha said, did the Buddha say that? So the Buddha tried to go between the is and is not, but the Buddhists understood that, rightly or wrongly. Buddhists understood that to mean that there is no cosmic reality. There is no one cosmic reality known as God or Brahman or a soul to the universe, and there's no soul in the individual. So they said that a person, whether human, animal, plant, or a god, they believed in the minor gods, Brahma and Indra and Varuna, Mitra, all of those. They believed in all of those gods. But they believed that they were also without souls, just as we are without souls. And so their idea was that we are just a bundle of tendencies, and we appear to be a unity because of the organized way in which this bundle of tendencies operates. And so it was the famous Alata, what was it? Alata Shanti was the name of stopping of that. But anyway, the waving of a firebrand. You go round and round and round, and you get the image of a circle because it's going so fast that the eye can't process the movement if it's going fast enough. So you get the image of a circle. And so the Buddhist said that the individual is nothing but fast-moving tendencies which are moving so fast that it gives a pattern, a recurring pattern of permanence. And so we think that I am an individual person with permanence. Now, Vedanta agrees that we are composites as individuals. We're composites. The body made up of many parts, the mind made up of parts, the different emotions, different memories. But they say that behind that there is the Jiva Atman. So now you have the Jiva, which is this composite. But behind all of this is the Jiva Atman. That is the reflection of consciousness, which is permanent, and which is a reflection of the infinite reality. And so therefore we have a sense of being the same person. I was once the little boy who used to run to his mother's lap, who used to love to play on swings and play with little cars and trucks. I have the sense that I'm the same person that was that little boy. And that is because even though everything about my manifest being has changed, this body has changed, my way of thinking has changed, my memories have changed, but there's a sense of permanence, and that sense of permanence comes from the Jivatman, that is the consciousness which is identified with this body and mind. So the Jiva is the body, the mind, the prana, which animates both, and then the consciousness, which is the consciousness part is known as the Jivatman. And so where does the Jivatman reside? Jivatman is the reflection of the infinite self, the infinite reality, which is known as the Atman, the true self. The Atman is reflected in the subtlest part of the mind. And that reflection is known as the Jivatman. And so again, my friend in the Himalayas at Mayavati, he asked this Swami that when the Swami told about the Jivatman, he said, I thought there was only one Atman. But no, the Jivatmans are many, but those are mere appearances according to non-dualistic Vedanta. And so this is where you get a difference between non-dualistic Vedanta and other schools of Vedanta. A dualist sees this Jivatman, the individual, what we can call the individual self. The dualist sees that as separate from God, dependent on God, created by God, but dependent on God, but never one with God. The qualified monists, the qualified non-dualists, the Vishishtadvaitins, of which there are several schools, like the Bheda of Nimbarka and of the Krishna consciousness, the Bengal Vaishnava school, and several other schools, the Shuddhadvaita of, I can never think of it, Vallabhacharya. There are different schools of qualified monism, but they say that the Jiva is both separate and unified with God. That is, the Jiva is a part of God, and as a part, it participates in the nature of God. And yet, it's because it's always dependent and because it's a limitation of God, it also has a certain separation. That is, it's a qualified part of God. Just as you have a fire and you have sparks of fire. The sparks are of the same nature as fire. They're part of the fire, but the spark is small and the fire is big. You have the ocean and the drops of water that make up the ocean. So as a drop, it has a separate identity, but it's a fundamental part of the ocean itself. And so qualified monists say that the Jivatmans, that is, that conscious principle that's in every living being, that is part of God, but it retains its individual nature for all eternity. So the dualists say that the Jivatman, the individual conscious principle, is eternally separate from God, but eternally dependent upon God, created by God. The qualified non-dualists say that it is a part of God, fundamentally of the same nature as God, but also dependent and eternally individualized part of God. And then the non-dualists say that no, the conscious principle within each living being is just an appearance of the one Atman. And so that's where we get the idea of there's only one Atman. That's the Advaitic idea, the non-dualistic idea, which the Ramakrishna movement, most of our swamis follow that philosophy. There's some who don't, but most of our swamis follow non-dualism because Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother, and Swami Vivekananda accepted that as the final truth. So that is where you get the identity between the individual and God. Either a qualified identity, that I'm of the same nature as God, I belong to God, or for the qualified monists, or I am one with reality itself. That once I see that this reflection of the infinite within my mind, that reflection is just a reflection, but I am that which is reflected within the mind. So again, this is why the Jiva and the Jivatman are fundamental to understanding Vedanta in any form, any school of Vedanta, including Kashmir Shaivism. They don't generally consider themselves a part of Vedanta, but they should, because their thought really comes from the same tradition. And so whether it's one of the schools of Vedanta or Shaiva Dvaita of Kashmir Shaivism, the understanding of the individual soul is fundamental. When I reincarnate, when I die and I come back into another lifetime, what is happening? This body wears out, or it's killed by some blow that's given to it, or a disease that comes to it. So it either wears out or it is killed suddenly by something external to it. Or an internal breakdown, sudden internal breakdown, but the body ceases to be capable of functioning with prana. That is, prana can no longer make it work, and so the prana leaves the body. The prana, again, as I said before, the prana takes with it the sense powers. It doesn't take the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, or the skin, of course. But it takes the power to perceive that works through these senses. That's another reason for knowing that the mind cannot be identical with the brain, and that there's plenty of published evidence of that in many near-death experiences which have been researched by scientists. There are scientists who still don't accept it, like Carl Sagan. He didn't accept that. But there's plenty of evidence of the near-death experience where people see themselves on a number of cases where people were being operated on in a surgical theater. And then suddenly something happened and they were pronounced clinically dead. And the person experienced that they were leaving the body. And they found themselves up in a corner of the surgical theater looking down at the doctors and nurses working furiously to revive the body which had just died clinically. The instrumentations showed that the vital functions had ceased. And yet the person was up in the corner of the room looking down, seeing the nurses, seeing the doctors, hearing them talking and saying, hand me the scalpel, quick, quick, apply pressure, or whatever they were saying. And later, when the doctors and nurses succeeded in resuscitating the person felt themselves pulled back into the body. And then when they were able to speak again, some of them could tell the doctors and nurses that I saw this and I heard this going on while you were trying to resuscitate me. And they said, that's impossible. You were clinically dead. Your body was not functioning. But they could repeat the words that were said and the actions that were done by the nurses and doctors. How is that possible if the power to see is only in the eyes? How is that possible if the power to hear is only in the ears? The ears were down there, the eyes were down there. And also it's been found in some of those cases that the perspective from which they saw and reported what was going on could only have been from outside. They couldn't have seen it lying on the table like this, even if their eyes were apparently not functioning. Well, maybe somehow they were functioning. No. Because the perspective from which they were in while they were being operated on would not have allowed them to see what they report seeing. And so the senses are not the receptors, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the skin where we feel. Those are mere receptors. Those are not the powers to see, hear, smell, touch, taste. That the power for that is other. It works through these receptors normally. But just as we can have a wireless transmission or a transmission of an electrical signal, electromagnetic signal through a wire, or wirelessly, either one. So these powers can work through the nervous system or they can work outside of the nervous system. And also it shows that the mind is not the brain, because they were up here looking down, seeing and hearing and thinking, receiving the information, conscious of the information from up here. Down there, the body was clinically dead. It was not functioning. Vitality had left it. The brain was not working. They had flatlined. And yet from up here, they saw, heard, and processed the information and remembered the information from up here. So, the consciousness and the prana, the vital force, the sense powers, the mind, and the conscious principle, those are what leave when we pass away. They leave the body when we pass away. And that is the jiva. Now, to exist again within a realm of existence, we have to have a body which is appropriate. And so we have this physical body. If we go to again, you don't have to believe in these other realms, but they are part of the system of thought. And so if you accept the words of those who claim to have seen these other realms, or that they exist, like Sri Ramakrishna and many others, great sages of the past, then if you are, say, reborn in a realm of the ancestors, you die and then you go to a heavenly realm called Chandraloka, or Bhuvaraloka, which is the realm of the ancestors. It's what most people in the world of all religions think of when they think of going to heaven. They're going to go to a place where they see their mother and father again, maybe a child who died in infancy, they're going to see their child again, they're going to be reunited with their grandparents and everything. Most people hope for a heaven which is basically a family reunion in very happy circumstances, where you don't get indigestion and fall sick from COVID-19 and things like that. You have a pleasurable experience and everybody's happy to see you and you're happy to see everybody. Even though we know that most families are not that ideal, that everybody's always happy to see each other. but that's our idea of a family heaven, where we go. So if we go to a world like that, and Vedanta says that yes, such a world exists, and people who are basically good, not spiritual, but basically good, when they die, they'll go to such a world for some time. Then they have to come back. But when we go there, we will take on a body appropriate to that world. So it's a very interesting thing. When you begin to look analytically at your own experience, you begin to look questioningly at what it is that I experience, it's very strange. We have this idea that there's this world out there, and I'm this little speck of insignificant dust somewhere in the midst of this world, running around with other insignificant specks of dust called other people and animals and plants and things, but in this huge cosmic system. But is that what we experience? No, that's what we assume is happening. But every being, whether it's you or a bacterium or a fly or a beetle or whatever, we perceive this world, yes, but we perceive a body which is a part of this world. All of us perceive a sphere of experience. That's all that we perceive. This body is part of the world. This is part of this. That's true for a fly, it's true for a bacterium, it's true for a plant, it's true for me. And so this body is part of this world. If I'm going to be in this world, the only way I'll be in this world is if I take on a body. And so yes, there are times, limited times, when you become disembodied, whether through a near-death experience, whether through deep meditation, or whether through some tremendous shock, traumatic experience that comes to you that shakes you out of identification with the body. For a limited time, you can see this world without having a physical body, but you can't last long that way. Then you go on to another realm. Even if you become, again, you don't have to believe in these things, but if you become what people call ghosts, that still sort of live in this realm, then you have a ghost body. You have a ghost body. That's why people sometimes see ghosts. And I'm not talking about people who imagine things, but people who actually see ghosts. They see them, they see that they have a ghostly form. That is, they have a ghostly body. And so, if you go to the realm of the ancestors, if you go to the realm of the gods, Swaraloka, a higher heaven, where the enjoyments are far more refined. Say you're a very good person, a very charitable person, and so forth. Again, not spiritual, but a very good person. Then you may go to the realm of the gods, where you live for a long time in a highly refined body with highly refined enjoyments. But you will live in a body appropriate to that realm. And so in whatever realm we go to, if it's a realm, we go incarnated in a body which is appropriate to that world. So again, the body, the mind, and the prana, which mediates with both, the sense powers, which again are separate from the receptors, the instruments that we call the senses, and then the consciousness. So of those, the most important part is the consciousness. So in the remaining time, let me speak more about the conscious part, that which is called the Jivatman, because that is fundamental to Vedanta. It is the Jivatman, the Atman, the real Atman, the unitary, non-dual Atman, which is the reality of the whole universe, which is reflected within the highest part, the subtlest part of the mind. And that is what gives the appearance of limitation. Just as, and it's only an illustration. Again, with every illustration, there's a truth which is shown in the illustration, and then there's the part that you have to realize, well, the illustration is not the thing itself. So if I say that, Sam is a tiger among men, I don't mean that he has stripes or he has a tail. I mean that he has certain regal characteristics of a tiger, and or maybe aggressive characteristics of a tiger, and so forth. So with every illustration, we have to remember that. So the illustration is given of the Jiva Atman, that when the sun is reflected in a small pot of water that you have out in the yard, you have a jar, a pot, some sort of container that's full of water, you get a perfect reflection of the sun. But that reflection of the sun seems to be limited. It's limited by the jar in which it's, the jar and water in which it's reflected. But it's a reflection of the real sun. And so when the real sun of the Atman is reflected in the highest part of the individual mind, then it thinks I am an individual. I am an individual separate from all of this. I am me and I'm not this. So that's the original sin. Vedanta doesn't believe in original sin. That's the original mistake. But we would say that that's what St. Paul was thinking of when he came up with the idea of original sin. The original sin was not taught by Christ. That was part of St. Paul's interpretation of his spiritual experience to explain the limitation of the individual soul. So in Vedanta, the original mistake is to think, I am this and I'm not all of that, that individuation. And along with that individuation comes the sense of I am. I am. And along with that sense of I am, I do and I experience. That is, I know, but I know this. I experience things. So I'm a doer and I'm a knower or an experiencer. These things come with the apparent limitation of the Atman. Remember that that's just apparent, that there is no limitation of the Atman. But we have to deal with what we experience. And so until we attain to the highest knowledge, we experience ourselves as limited. And so the source of the ego, the source of the sense of I am, is from the conscious principle itself, the Jivatman. But the sense of I am only comes along with the sense of what I am not. I am not that. I am this. I am this. I'm not that. And so the sense of I am comes from that distinction. But the important thing is that I am comes from the Atman. It's the Atman which manifests in the individual as the sense of I am. And so that's why great teachers like Ramana Maharshi and others teach, and going back to the Upanishads, hold on to the sense of I am and find out where it comes from. Because where the sense of I am comes from is the absolute truth. That is the Atman. But when you come to that, even the sense of I am disappears, because there's no more this. There's just that which was the source of the I am. But when there's nothing but the I am, there's nothing else, then there's no need, nor is there any possibility of affirming I am. I am is affirmed when there is I am not. And so the Jiva, the Jivatman, I should say, the Jivatman, which is the center of your being, that's the essence of your being. The body, the mind, the memories, the prana, all of that is what allows you to live within a realm like this or some other realm of experience, and to act and to enjoy and to experience. But the essence of all of that is the conscious principle, which is the Jivatman reflected in the highest part of the mind. And so if we go to that, where the sense of I am comes from, then if we seek the source of the I am, it eventually leads us to the Atman, because that is where it is founded. And so the Vedanta philosophy says that through all of my incarnations, speaking not personally, but for any living being, through all of my incarnations, the Jivatman is the same Jivatman, and it carries the same mind. That's why it's possible, we don't advise trying to do it, but sometimes it happens, memories from past lives surface, because those memories are there. I have the same mind that I've carried through lifetime after lifetime. The experiences, the karma from lifetimes I carry with me. And so I carry the same mind, the same individualized consciousness reflected in the same mind, and the prana. I carry that with me, and manifest new bodies and so forth, and the power to sense, the power to know. So that gives me the sense of being a permanent entity. But when I realize the highest, the Jivatman, the individual self, merges into the Supreme Self. And I realized that's what I was all along. I thought that I was this. I thought that I was a living being, born in various circumstances in various lifetimes, going from life to life, having experience after experience. But I, the conscious principle, was really the Atman all of the time. All of this, the sense of being a Jiva, a living being, the sense of being separate from all of this, the sense of living within a world or living within other worlds, that all was just an appearance within me, the Supreme Self. And so remember I said that one of the illustrations given for the nature of the Jiva Atman is the sun, which represents the Atman, the Supreme Self, reflected in a pot of water, which is the pot being the body and the water being the mind, and the top of the water being the subtlest part of the mind where the reflection is caught. As I said, every illustration has a good illustration has a truth to it, but it also has that which is not true to what you're trying to illustrate. And so with the pot and the water and everything, you have the sun, you have a pre-existing pot, you fill it up with water, you put it out in the sun, and you catch the reflection. That's not really what happens. It's through the power of Maya that the Atman forgets itself and thinks itself to be an individualized mind dwelling within a physical body, a body appropriate to that realm of existence. And so it's not that when you realize the self, the body, the pot with the water is still there. Or if somebody comes and kicks over the pot and spills the water out, then suddenly the reflection is gone. No, that's not part of what the illustration is meant to show. It's only meant to show that there is the Supreme Self, which appears to be the reflected self. So let me just say a little bit more about that, and then I'll close. And that is that there are three. Let me start over and say that within the school of Advaita Vedanta, non-dualistic Vedanta, there are three views of the Jiva. And this I could develop into a whole a course of lectures, because it's more complicated than I'm going to tell, but I'm going to simplify it as it is done in the tradition. This simplification is done in the tradition itself. There are three basic views of the Jiva. One is called Avachedavada. You don't have to remember these scary Sanskrit terms, but that's the technical term, Avachedavada. That is the doctrine of apparent limitation. And that is, if you have a pot, we talk about the space inside of the pot. This cup is useful because of the space inside of it. But is there really space inside of it? Can you really divide space? No, there's space here. There's space here in the wall. The space is continuous. This space, and this space is all continuous space. It's only the apparent limitation of space within the pot, the space within the jar. This space is different from that space. But actual space you can't divide. It's just an apparent division. You see, this is space, this is space, this is space, that's space, this is space, this is space. It's all space, indivisible. And yet for practical purposes, we talk about this space and that space. And that allows me to pour ginger and honey into this and water into that for practical purposes. But it's only so. Avachedavada says that the Jiva is like that. That the Jiva is apparently limited by this body and mind. That pure consciousness, which can't be limited by anything, appears for practical purposes to be limited by this body and mind. So that I do, I go, I see, I hear. But actually, consciousness can't be limited in any way. It's only an apparent limitation for practical purposes, just like the apparent limitation of space for practical purposes. So Avachedavada, which uses the illustration of various containers, the space inside and the space outside. But actually, space doesn't observe any inside or outside. That's only for our practical purposes. Second one, Pratibimbavada, the reflection theory. And that is the theory of the illustration of the pot of water. And you have many pots of water, different sizes of pots and different clarities of water, some pure water, some dirty water, etc. And all of them catch a reflection of the sun. There's a sun in each scene in each one of them. But that's only the apparent reflection. Now, the problem with that illustration is there's a problem with each of the doctrines. The problem with that illustration is that for the purpose of illustration, we say that there's a perfect reflection of the sun within the water in the pot. But of course, actually, it's not. You don't get the other side of the sun. You're only getting the part of the sun that's facing you. And it's just a reflection. It's not the same as the sun. It doesn't have the power of the sun. Whereas with consciousness reflected within the mind, it's the reality of consciousness which is reflected in the mind, which is in the mind. And so, therefore, they came up with the Abhasavada. Vidyaranya, the great sage who wrote the Panchadashi and Jivan Mukti Viveka, he developed, though it's adumbrated, the idea is there in Shankaracharya and in others, but it was fully developed as a philosophy by Vidyaranya in Panchadashi, the idea of Abhasavada. I won't go into the details of that because it's more complicated, because it tries to deal with the fact that consciousness is reflected in the mind, but what you are, what I am, is the reality. I'm not a reflection. I'm the reality itself. And so it says that the jiva is a combination of the reflection in the mind, the limitation of the ignorance which is joined with that reflection, which allows for the reflection. So the reflection, the ignorance which contains the reflection, and the original itself. All of that is part of the Jivatman. And so when you realize yourself to be the Atman, you realize that I am what I always was. Again, the problem with the Pratibimbavada, it has its virtues, but and one of its virtues is its simplicity. But one of the problems is that if I am a reflection of the consciousness, then when the Atman is realized, then I disappear because I'm the reflection of consciousness. And so, no, that's not the case. You are the reality itself. So we are the Atman even now, but we only appear to be the reflected consciousness which thinks, I am the doer, I am the knower, I am the enjoyer, and I am an individual. So I'll conclude with that. The jiva, again, by summarizing, that the jiva is made up of a body appropriate to the realm in which it dwells, a mind which allows for the functioning of consciousness, processes of consciousness, or consciousness has no process, but it allows for intelligence, which is different from consciousness. And then the prana, which is vitality, which mediates between the mind and body and allows for the vitality of the mind and body. And then the conscious self, the Jivatman, which is an apparent limitation of the infinite self. And so, from the standpoint of devotion, I think of myself as a jiva, as a living being, an individual self, and I seek God who is the infinite, and I relate myself to God. I seek God as a jiva, and eventually I seek God as the jivatman, the individual self seeking the beloved Lord. Or as Rumi says in one of his beautiful poems, that I was a mineral and I died and became a plant. I was a plant, I died and became an animal. I was an animal, I died and I became man. I was a man and I died and I became the beloved. What have I ever lost by dying? And so the Jivatman goes in search of the beloved, or the Jnani goes in search of himself, herself, the self. So the jiva is critical to understanding not only Vedanta, but life itself. Who I am, who I experience myself as. I don't experience myself right now as the Atman, unfortunately. I have to deal with what it is I experience myself to be. And so, yes, I can do self-inquiry and seek what is the source of my sense of I am, but I have to deal with the present experience, which is why Sri Ramakrishna said, it won't do to say there is no thorn when you prick yourself with a thorn and your finger is hurting. You can't say that there's no thorn or you're feeling pain and you're hurting. You have to deal with the actual situation. And so we have to deal with the apparent fact of jivahood until we can find our way back either to God or to the self. So with that, I will close on the jiva. So let me give announcements, and then if there are any questions, I will take questions. For announcements, on Tuesday, we will have the Bhagavad Gita class as usual. On Thursday, we will have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class as usual. The Gita class Tuesday at 7:30 p.m., the Gospel class Thursday at 11 a.m. And next Sunday, I will give a talk, but I haven't yet given topics for next month. So I'll have to, from the beginning of November. So I have to come up with topics for next month, starting next Sunday. So we will send out an email announcement with the topics, and they will be posted on the website. But I have to come up with them first. So yes, Surenji. Yes, so the avatara, and I'll come back to the avatara, but let me say that another thing I didn't explain was, where does God come from? If we are reflections of the infinite self, well, what is God and what is an avatara? So the avatara has a jiva also. It is the avatara incarnates as a jiva, a living being. Sri Ramakrishna had a body, he had a mind, he had prana, which allowed the body and mind to function. He had the sense of I am, though he couldn't use the pronouns I am because he had surrendered his sense of agency to the Divine Mother. And yet, if you asked him, sir, where was this your body? Where was your body born? He could say, from Kamarpukur. What were the names of your parents? He could tell the names of his parents. He told memories of his childhood. He told memories of his friends, childhood friends in Kamarpukur, etc. He knew what he had eaten for lunch. He could tell you. If he wasn't too abstracted, he could tell you what he had eaten for lunch that day. How is that possible? It's possible because he had manifested as a jiva. So the incarnation takes on jivahood. We don't take on jivahood. We find ourselves, jivahood has taken on us. We are born, and nobody asks us if we want to be born. We just find ourselves forced into life. And that's why we come in crying. Because somebody forced us into life, or if not somebody, dynamics of the world forced us into life. But the incarnation chooses to take on jivahood. The incarnation chooses to take that on. And the incarnation retains an illumined sense of jivahood. That's why we have Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji on the altar. That's why Christians have Christ, why Buddhists have Buddha, who didn't even believe in a self. And yet, for 2,500 years, Buddhists have been worshiping the Buddha. Why? Because the incarnation retains an illumined sense of individuality. Illumined because they know that they're one with reality itself, one with God. And yet they retain a sense of identity which allows us to worship them and to get a response from them, which allows us to pray to them and receive a response from them. And so Buddha, after his nirvana under the Bodhi tree, He said in the famous words that Sir Edwin Arnold puts in his mouth from traditional texts. He said, "O constructor of this tabernacle, I have found you out. You who have raised the roof, the rafters of this tabernacle, the human body and the mind." So who was speaking? Buddha had just realized nirvana, realized that there is no self, realized that there's no reality to the universe, no reality to the individual, a state which he called nirvana. So who was saying, "I have found you out," to Mara, the tempter, the power of illusion? Who was saying, "I have found you out"? That was the Buddha, the Jiva of the Buddha. So an incarnation has, including a realized soul, if they come back to this realm from their state of illumination, they come back with a sense of illuminated jivahood. They know that they are the infinite, and yet they are allowed to work through this illuminated sense of jivahood. So, and then Anantaraman. When J.C. Bose, who demonstrated that plants too have a life, met Swami Brahmananda, the Swami told him that inanimate objects looked up to him for declaring their life. Are stones jiva too? That's a very good question. And now I'm already over time, so I'm afraid that was something that I had originally thought of mentioning today, but there wasn't time for it. It's a very good question. So no, stones are not jivas, and yet everywhere there is consciousness. This is pure consciousness. I see it as a table, but it's pure consciousness. But what makes a jiva is that it can respond as an individual. It can respond as an individual. That's the difference between a jiva and a computer, and why artificial intelligence will never become a replacement for life, because artificial intelligence doesn't have a jiva, individualized consciousness. The computer, no matter how complex it is, doesn't know what it is doing. You can program it to say hello and to answer questions and to carry on a dialogue and to play chess, but there's nobody inside of the computer that is aware of what's going on. And so that's the difference. And so as far as we know, stones do not have jivahood. That is, they don't have life, prana, but the stone is nothing but consciousness. However, let me qualify that by saying that I won't be dogmatic about that, because there are stories, both what you quote here about Swami Brahmananda, and also in the stories of the great Zen masters in the Buddhist tradition, that one of the Zen masters would go out and preach sermons to the stones, that he saw sentience everywhere, and saw that the stones also, that he would speak to the stones. So I don't know what that means experientially, but there are examples of that, and what Swami Brahmananda said also. But traditionally, the idea is, and it makes sense, but it may not make super sense, that is that you have the difference between the inanimate and the animate is that the inanimate, there's not the presence of an individualized consciousness which knows, I am a stone and this stone is my body, but I am the jiva who dwells within this stone. So therefore the stone doesn't have individualized sentience which allows it to respond to us in any way. So, in brief, that's the best I can do with an answer. So, with that, I will give a closing chant. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens. Peace is in the sky. Peace is on earth. Peace in the waters. Peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.